here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming in partnership with the Washington Examiner. I am Jimmy Sengenberger here at the leadership program of the Rockies retreat, Friday, June 4th, at the Broadmoor Hotel at Colorado Springs, Colorado. It is a beautiful, beautiful place for the leadership program of the Rockies retreat, Saving Freedom 1776. And let's be clear that freedom is under assault all across the globe. As we're recording this, it is the 32nd anniversary of the Tianamen Square Massacre. And yet, as has been tradition, Hong Kong today is not holding a vigil. Isn't that sad? Who better to talk about this and other related topics relative to China, Wuhan, we'll see where we go, than our good friend of the show, Gordon G. Chang. Gordon, welcome back, and it is good to interview you in person for a change.
This is great. This is absolutely great.
I met you here at this Broadmoor Hotel at a 2017 conference, and we haven't seen each other since, except on camera when we've done Crossroads interviews and on the radio, so it is really a treat.
Well, it's a great treat for me.
Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
And I wasn't able to catch your speech because you just spoke, but I got some good feedback from a couple of folks. What's the tenor of the talk that you gave?
Yeah, I talked about China's subversion of the United States through disease, through actual incitement of violence, through fentanyl. And I talked about how China declared the U.S. to be its enemy. They did that in May 2019. People's Daily, the most authoritative publication in China, declared a quote-unquote people's war on the U.S. And we have a president who won't even say that they're an adversary. He just says they're a competitor. What I talked about was the existential nature of China's challenge, that Beijing believes it has the right to rule the world. And indeed, I had talked about Chinese officials saying that they should rule the near parts of the solar system, which sounds ludicrous, but no, I'm not exaggerating.
So the 32nd anniversary of the horrific Tianamen Square Massacre, they're not having a vigil in Hong Kong. Talk to me your sense about that and what's been happening in Hong Kong and the world's reaction, or really lack thereof, certainly not in any substantial or credible way, to what's been happening.
Yeah. Every year up until last year, there's been a candlelight vigil, mostly in Victoria Park, which is in Causeway Bay, where tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people gather in dusk to commemorate the slaughter in Tiananmen Square. This year was not permitted. And people who actually tried to memorialize the Tiananmen Massacre were subject to a 5-year jail sentence for a violation of the new national security law. So Beijing has tried its best. Now, it swooped down and it actually arrested a democracy organizer for nothing more than speech, and it arrested about 6 or 7 other people. There was a minor scuffle in a place called Mongkok, but people on their own left candles on the street, and that's an act of defiance.
That is, and that's a powerful one. When you're told you can't have a candlelight vigil and get together, yet you find a way to do it. And that isn't that the nature of how freedom fighters have been advocating for themselves and their rights in China since the Communist Revolution, and on now to what we're seeing in Hong Kong, where they are being subjugated, and in just the arrests and everything is just so horrific.
Well, I ended my talk today by commemorating Tiananmen, and Lydia, my wife, brought up a candle which we held up. And people in the audience actually held up their cell phones with their flashlight on, it was so emotional for me.
In terms of the world's reaction and response, especially world leaders to Hong Kong and the travesty there of Beijing swooping in and subjugating that city, what do you make of it? Because it seemed, and we talked about this last year when it happened, that they were really using the cover of COVID to take this step, and then the world was focused elsewhere. And we haven't seen, certainly not sufficient pushback, but not very much.
Yeah. The Hong Kong government, which is basically acting at the behest of Beijing, has banned all protests. Although, and this is COVID, they say, but when they have a pro-government demonstration or meeting, they violate their own quote-unquote safety protocols. Yeah, the world hasn't done much, and President Biden, when he ran, said he was going to be the human rights president. Well, now he has a chance to show it, because Beijing is watching. Because if China feels it can get away with absorbing Hong Kong as it has, then it's going to move on other areas. And we know that Beijing believes that it has a right and indeed the obligation to rule the world. Xi Jinping has criticized the existing Westphalian international order. He wants to impose China's imperial system, where Chinese emperors believe they had the mandate of heaven over what they called Tianxia, or all under heaven. And Xi Jinping has been making Tianxia references in his recent pronouncements, and recently they've become very explicit. And Chinese officials have been talking about this. So we know it's not just Hong Kong.
How about, you mentioned the Biden administration and things that they're unwilling to say. What's your assessment so far now, 6-ish months into the presidency?
They have yet to settle their China policy, so we really don't know where they're going. I mean, they've done some good things. They've done some really atrocious things. So the one thing that sticks out in my mind is that within hours of taking office, President Biden suspended President Trump's May 1st, 2020 executive order, which prohibited grid operators and utilities from buying equipment from China. Obviously, the reason was sabotage. I got really upset when Biden started talking in public about the Colonial Pipeline hack and saying, oh, we're going to protect our grid. Well, he left our grid vulnerable to Chinese sabotage for no reason. He didn't get anything from China in return, and now our grid is open. Those are the types of things that Biden has done, which to me are indefensible.
At the same time, when we look at COVID-19 and the fact that it originated in Wuhan, now there's a lot more interest from even the Biden administration that had not been in place for Democrats, the media, for Biden under President Trump, and even until just in the last month or so, about Wuhan Institute of Virology potentially being the original source where, through gain-of-function research, it was created in a lab. That's the hypothesis. I've been talking about this hypothesis for well over a year now. I've been thinking it was quite likely that that was the case. Not saying that it was intentional, but at the very least generated in a lab through experiments. What do you make of the sudden credibility that now we're seeing for this?
Well, President Trump isn't around, so, when President Trump talked about a lab leak, and so everyone else said, no, can't be a lab leak. So it was sort of like the orange man bad phenomena. But I think what's happened is we know that Biden is not really interested in finding out the origins of COVID-19. He had a 2-hour phone call with Xi Jinping in February, and by Biden's own admission, he didn't raise the subject of the disease, which is, today has now killed 597,000 Americans. What happened, and I talked about this today, but what happened last Wednesday was really instructive. Last Wednesday, CNN, early in the morning, issues this story about how the State Department spiked an investigation into COVID-19. And there was an outrage. And then Biden, later on in the day, had to issue his executive order to the intelligence community to look at the origins of COVID-19, report back in 90 days. Biden didn't want to do that. But what's happened is that there is now so much anger. There's so much political pressure. I guess that when Biden woke up last Wednesday, he had no idea that he was going to order the intelligence community to look at COVID-19. But now it's politically impossible for him not to do so.
So if they were to conclude, the federal government, that it was, in fact, created in a lab through these experiments, maybe an experiment gone wrong, got into a doctor or one of the scientists, rather, and then he left the lab, or she or whomever, and then it spread from there. What kind of consequences do you think China should face for that?
It should face the most severe consequences, because this is not the last pathogen that is going to come from China. We know they're working on diseases which will leave the Chinese immune and sicken everybody else, which means that this will be a civilization killer. We cannot allow Xi Jinping to think that he can spread the next disease. And Jimmy, regardless of how SARS-CoV-2, this pathogen, arose, whether it's natural or whether it was man-made, we do know one thing. And that after this got out and crippled Chinese society, Xi Jinping took steps that he knew or had to know would lead to the spread of the disease beyond China. He lied about contagiousness, and then he pressured other countries to not impose travel restrictions and quarantines on arrivals from China while he was locking down his own country. You put those two things together, it was clear he wanted this to spread beyond China. There needs to be the most severe consequences on that.
We're talking with the author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War, Gordon G. Chang, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, in person at the leadership program of the Rockies retreat in Colorado Springs. And Gordon, as we were talking about Hong Kong earlier, I was also thinking about Taiwan and the expansionist efforts as well of China, as you were alluding to before, in, say, places like Africa and other parts of the globe. Talk to me a little bit about Taiwan and the nature of the relationship between also the United States and Taiwan in terms of saying, I mean, President Trump and Mike Pompeo, just on the way out the door, had a very strong statement of support for Taiwan, but there and the expansionist efforts of China.
Right now, China's pressuring Taiwan militarily. We had for a period of several months these almost daily incursions into Taiwan's air defense identification zone by Chinese aircraft. Chinese aircraft have been flying on Taiwan's side of the median line, which goes right down the Taiwan Strait. For decades, there was this agreement. China stays to the west of the line, Taiwan stays to the east. Well, the Chinese have been flying to the east of the line. And then there have been these big naval exercises by China circumnavigating the island, extremely provocative and belligerent. The Biden administration, to its credit, has stepped up the U.S. Navy patrols in the area. There have been these transits of the Taiwan Strait, but this looks incredibly dangerous right now.
So what if you were in the room with President Biden and able to advise him on Chinese policy as far as their expansionist efforts and in terms of the COVID-19 spread, what would you tell him he should do?
I tell him the first thing he should do is he should declare in public that the United States will defend Taiwan. And we should say to Taipei that if they want a mutual defense treaty, we will sign one. It just seems to me that Taiwan is critical to the defense of the U.S. Since the end of the 19th century. That's where we've drawn our western defense perimeter, is off the coast of East Asia. Taiwan sits in the middle of that critical line where the South China Sea and East China Sea meet. But there's something even more important, Jimmy, and that is that in these days of China attacking democracy, we cannot allow the Chinese to absorb any democracy, especially one as important as Taiwan. So defending Taiwan is really defending America.
Now, how about international organizations like the WHO? We can recall what happened last year in the early days of COVID. They were helping China to keep the reality of how this would spread, the infectious nature of it, and so forth. But then also, remember the Hong Kong media outlet at the time that was shut down from an interview where they cut it off when asked a difficult question. And then the WHO has people who are supposedly looking into the origin of this virus, and they're like, no way was it created in the lab.
Do we have a few hours? I mean, the WHO actually helped China spread the disease. Senior doctors at the organization knew that SARS-CoV-2, the pathogen, was highly contagious. But the leadership of the WHO issued their January 9, 2020 statement, January 14 tweet, propagating China's narrative that it was not contagious, when the senior doctors at the organization knew that it was. That lulled public health officials into not taking precautions they otherwise would have. So WHO helped China spread this disease beyond China's borders.
So in terms of the Fauci emails, which are related to this because of the origination. I mean, he was getting emails from scientists, credible scientists, saying, it really seems like something's fishy here, but he kept downplaying it. And now he's like, no, I just thought that it was highly likely that it was a natural occurrence, and I wasn't really dismissing it. What do you make of that?
Fauci has a lot to hide. I mean, in fiscal 2014, his National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases actually authorized a grant to the EcoHealth Alliance, a New York NGO, for the purpose that EcoHealth would send the money to the Wuhan Institute for bat coronavirus research. And we know that the Wuhan Institute used it for gain-of-function research because the papers that were published from that research are gain-of-function techniques. So although Fauci may not have wanted the Chinese to do this, he knew that he should have known that they used it for gain of function, which is basically China's biological weapons program, which means Fauci had an obligation to talk about this, and he didn't.
2012, Fauci was talking about it might be worth the risk of a pandemic to do gain-of-function research.
Yes, and that just shows you that he actually believes this. Now, this research is so dangerous that the Obama administration prohibited in the U.S. Well, we shouldn't outsource it to another country. And so this was an action without a justification.
Final question, and then I have a little treat for you here on site together, Gordon G. Chang. Where do you think we go from here based on the trajectory of the Biden policy so far, and now whether it's with Wuhan lab and now the greater interest in that, the credibility, or when we're talking about what's happening in Hong Kong and the fact that the liberties of the people of Hong Kong are being absolutely subjugated onto their expansion? Anywhere you want to go with that?
I think that we're going to see a severing of relations between China and the U.S. Not that Biden wants it, of course he doesn't want it, but the American people are going to drive it because we're going to learn more and more that China acted maliciously, and its actions resulted in the deaths of now hundreds of thousands of Americans.
We've had such a difficult conversation. I want to turn to something a little bit more fun because I never leave home without my harmonicas, at the very least my case of 7 harmonicas, and I got them here. See, they're each a different key, and I hope that it's not too much going on around here because I figured I ought to play a little bit on location for you, Gordon. Oh, right, this one needs to be replaced.
You do that,
there we go. Oh.
I did not bring my Jimmy at the Crossroads mug.
Me neither. Well, cheers nonetheless. Yes. I was in such a hurry today that I forgot. I was going to bring 2 and then let you use the other one, and it could have been a stand. And folks, he has a Jimmy at the Crossroads mug and showed it on our last episode when he was on. So absolutely, I got a D harmonica meeting playing in the key of A. I'm getting a little treat here for Gordon G. Chang at the leadership program of the Rockies Retreat. Gordon G. Chang, just for you, my friend.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Such a treat to see you in person here at the retreat.
Oh,
I'm so glad you were invited.
Thank you.